Okay, so tonight's optional lecture, we are going to go into detail about how we can evaluate strings. We're going to be reviewing some concepts that we've covered this semester. We're going to be going over implementation of hash tables and dynamic programming so we can find the longest subsequence of non-repeating characters in a string in big O of n time. And we are also going to go through some code, and this will allow us to be able to reevaluate stacks and being able to check for valid parentheses or not in a code segment. We'll be able to do that in big O of n time as well. But first, today's guest speaker is Paulina Camara. So Paulina is, I have a special place in my heart for Paulina for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, she was in my very first class that I taught here at Notre Dame, and she is going to be graduating in the spring. She also has been my TA for Introduction to Computing, and she has the distinction until the TA's next semester, but she was the very first person to do a pre-ternship from both the perspective of doing a project as well as being a project manager. And this experience has been tremendous for her. She had an internship last summer at RJ Reliance, and now, and we've just found out very recently that she has received an offer from Microsoft. And so I am tremendously proud of all the things that Paulina has accomplished. And I think that her perspective is a really good one for everyone to hear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow Paulina to do her thing. And then if you have any questions, please feel free to ask her at the end.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Morrison, for that introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, hopefully everybody can see that. I'm going to go ahead and present. Right, so my presentation is going to focus on project management and sort of the skills associated with it, as well as my experience. This is a very special topic for me, just because I know that it can be sometimes like kind of boring to hear somebody talk about something kind of generic such as project management. But hopefully, if there's at least one person who can take something away from this, I'd be really happy, because I was the one person who took something away from information given to me by Dr. Morrison, and it's just really changed the course of my professional career. So hopefully this is very helpful. So this is project management. I'm Paulina Camara. I'm a computer science student in the class of 2021. And just to start off really quick, I'm going to go ahead and talk about a brief overview of what project management is. So basically, project managers are responsible for planning, organizing, and directing the completion of specific projects for an organization while ensuring these projects are on time, on budget, and within scope. I know it's kind of a very generic description, but basically project managers have a lot of responsibility upon their shoulders, especially from a computer science perspective. Project managers are the ones who are talking to stakeholders. Those are the people that are like, I want this software to do this. They tell the project management person, and the project manager takes control of the software development teams and has to assign different topics, different things that they're supposed to do. They have to make sure these things are done correctly. They have to document this, and they have to make sure that all the other smaller things such as risk mitigation, issue control, all of that is taken into consideration as well, which is kind of a little more of what I'm going to delve into. But this is basically what a project manager does. And also another thing that I used to always ask is, what do you need to do, or who do you need to be a project manager in terms of what you're studying in college? If first of all, anybody can be a project manager, but in terms of going more into the tech topic sector of project management, it's always nice to have a technical background, but project management is actually a general thing that encompasses a lot of different departments, I guess you could call it. Right, so my story. So I started off, I am a computer science student. I came into computer science, and at least in my experience, I always felt that software engineering was always kind of the end goal. I always thought it was one of the two only job options, just because everybody would always talk about either going into software engineering or going into consulting. And I was just like, okay, I'll be a software engineer, but there was just something about it that I felt just kind of wasn't exactly for me, even though I could do it. And so I really want to emphasize that I found out about project management at the very beginning of my junior year, because I know a lot of people may feel like, oh, it's too late, like I'm already so into my career, at least into my major. But I the very beginning of my junior year, everybody had already had past internships, barely found out what project management is. So I really want to emphasize that it's never too late to just kind of switch the focus of what you want to go into. So when I found out about project management, I thought it was just something that I'd be really good at. I felt like I had the personality for it. And so what I did was I involved myself in pretty much anything that could foster any project management skills, which I will delve into a little more about what the skills are. But so I went into a lot of different positions, and ultimately I received an internship offer with a company called RJ Reliance, which is a consulting company. And I just very recently received a job offer from Microsoft. So I'm going to go in to, I guess, each of these little points a little more to kind of go through really what my story and what my experience was and how hopefully you guys can benefit from what I learned. So basically, a lot of people are always wondering what project management skills are. So I've divided a couple of hard skills and soft skills. Hard skills encompass pretty much, as I said previously, being able to plan a project from completion to implementation, being able to map out timelines, executing phases of the project from a development side as well as from a leadership side, and working with stakeholders face-to-face in a client-facing position, as well as delivering products and as keeping proper project documentation. It's also a skill that you really need to have and that you're really going to use if you're in a project management position. So while those are really important, what leads a lot of people into kind of figuring out if project management is something that's for them has to do a lot with the soft skills, actually. There's so much communication that's needed as a project manager because you are the center point of talking to stakeholders, talking to clients, talking to customers, getting all the information that they need, that they want from their project, and then having to translate that in terms that your professional team can understand, such as software developers. If your client wants a software that connects one computer to a different one, you need to be able to talk to them kind of from a user UI approach, and then being able to break that down into the individual components that software development team needs to be split up in. So if you're good at communication, if you're good at balancing a lot, having a lot on your plate and being able to effectively talk to a lot of people, that's a really good skill to have. And project management is definitely something that maybe you should look into. That's kind of what set me off a little more. I feel like being able to communicate leads into the other soft skills such as leadership, scheduling, risk management, cost management. They tend to be skills that are often developed through the communication phase. So these are just a couple of overviewing skills that are really used and really needed in a project management position. So some of the, as I stated previously, when I found out about project management at the beginning of my junior year, exactly a year ago, I did everything in my position to be able to get some experience with these skills. Hard skills as well as soft skills. And I was in a position where I had to do it very fast because, it was junior year, beginning of senior years when everybody starts finding their jobs. So that's what I did. I engaged myself in a lot of different experiences where I was able to foster some of these project management skills. So the first one was a teaching assistant / actual project manager for Dr. Morrison's class. So on the left side, I've written what my resume description is. I know this one's a little long. And on the right side, I decided to go ahead and show what project management skills I actually exercised through this experience. So as a project manager for Dr. Morrison's class, I managed 4 different undergraduate teams in their preternship where they worked with an actual software company who had real projects. So this experience wasn't like, oh, I'm a TA and we're doing, a class project. There were real stakeholders who were really depending on the teams that I was managing as a project manager to complete their required timeline things that they had to do. So I was put in a position very quickly where I was I was a project manager and I had to communicate with the stakeholders. I had to communicate with my 4 teams, while at the same time as a teaching assistant, I had to communicate with my supervisor, which was Dr. Morrison. So there was so much communication at the same time while I was managing the teams. I had to make sure that they were turning in their code on time. I was grading it. I had to document every single project extensively from beginning to end. It was a lot. And so the PM skills that I actually highlight here are the ones that now that I've done an internship interview as well as a full-time job interview, these are the skills that employers are looking for you to talk about and for you to have kind of experiences with, which are working with multiple stakeholders. They know that you can balance being everywhere at once, having client-to-client interaction, like face-to-face, as opposed to when you're a software developer where you're just, coding, you're in your computer. Being in a position where you have to talk to multiple people and deal with them is very important as a project manager to have in terms of experience. Managing multiple teams, as I said, another important thing. I also added choosing organizational cycles, which ones are best for each team is also something that's a little more specific, but also really important, especially if you're a project manager for a software development project. You need to know what project management life cycles, the spiral software life cycle, things like that, or something that they really look for you to mention, I guess, in interviews, as well as dealing with difficult people. I dealt with stakeholders who were just asking more and more and more of my teams, when in reality, these teams were just students in a class and I was their teaching assistant. And being able to talk to them professionally and, communicate to them what could and couldn't be done was a skill that was mentioned a lot in interviews. And basically, I just want to emphasize the fact that being able to juggle a lot, being able to communicate is probably the most prominent feature of being a project manager that will help you not only in the position, but if you're applying to roles or if you're interviewing for these roles. Another of the experiences that I decided would help me a lot in getting a project management position was getting a job in the IT center at Notre Dame. So I was an IT software consultant. I signed up and I worked I went between working in the back and working in the front, but I tried to work in the front desk as much as I could because, as you can see on the right side, I dealt with all types of people. I dealt with students who were crying because their laptop charger wasn't working and they had to take a test in 2 minutes. I dealt with, older people who had no clue about the issues they were having. It was just so many different experiences that really emphasized the client-to-client interaction through working at OIT was just something that helped me a lot also in interviews, as well as I had this experience that allowed me to show how I balance between tech and working with others. So the most important thing about being a project manager is that you're not fully kind of like a techie person. You're not completely a software engineer, but you're also not in a business position where you're like the main, client position where there's no technicality. So what they're looking for in project management positions is that your tech, but also you're more of a people person, somebody that can work with others. So that's why I decided that this experience would be a good one. And the reason I'm emphasizing this experience, which isn't really a project management experience, is because if you are looking to go into project management, it's I guess the title is kind of specific. So there might not be a lot of project management roles at school, but definitely try to find a role where you're working with problems, working to find solutions, and you're able to emphasize that there's a split between your technicality as well as working with others. So some of the sample interview questions that I had in my internship and that I will further discuss, I decided to put a couple of them just so you know a little bit about what you could be asked. For example, tell us about a time you had to work with a difficult customer. These are more behavioral ones, but if you are able to find positions, as I said, where your experience is client face-to-face, project management interview questions will be a breeze, at least for the most part from my experience. Usually they really want to dwell on behavior and they want to see that you're somebody who really knows what they're doing in tech, but as I said, who can also work with others. So yeah, these are just a couple of interview questions that you can find online. Decided to add them in case anybody wanted to see a little bit. But yeah, so my first big project management experience was with RJ Reliance, which is a consulting firm that specializes on software solutions. And thanks to my pre-internship experience, as well as my working in IT and working client face-to-face, all the interview questions that I had that were behavioral, that were, tell me a time you dealt with a difficult customer, tell me about a time where you didn't have a solution for something and somebody really needed something done fast. Those types of things, I knew exactly how to answer them because I worked in the pre-internship experience and I worked in IT. So as I said, just another emphasis on project management really dwells on the experiences. So please, if it's something that you're really looking into, put yourself in a position where you have to work through to find a solution and you're working with others as well as working in between tech sectors. So again, RJ Reliance, what I did with them was I worked on a payroll specialization project where another company was going to merge with an even bigger company, and they had to move all of their payroll employees from one payroll to another one. And the difficult part was that the company that was merging, the employees were getting paid bi-weekly, but the company that bought them out, the employees were getting paid every 15 days. And I know that kind of sounds like the same thing, but the biweekly actually ended up being 14 days. So there had to be a huge change in the whole payroll transaction system where everybody had to be moved to a new payroll software. I was in charge of making sure that the company got moved completely. So it was a lot of responsibility. And I had to make sure that all the project scopes, which were, is it possible to move all the employees? Is it possible to move them on time? Are the employees going to want to be moved to a new payroll system? Because a lot of them didn't want to be. I had to make sure that I was communicating that with both of the companies that were being merged. I was communicating that with my supervisor because I was an intern, while at the same time, I had to document every single thing that was happening. I had to measure project performance. I had to do the risk management. All of that was just, it was a crazy experience, but definitely doable. And I was definitely prepared to deal with, all the crazy interactions that I had, because as I said, I had managed to put myself in positions as a teaching assistant, as a Preternship Project Manager, as well as an IT software consultant, where I had worked with other people. So this is a little of how my internship went. And I was able to secure the internship. As I said, just with the interview, I was able to kill it with the experiences that I had. So it was really nice to know that I was prepared for that, just because I put my head to it and involved myself in some things in school. So after my internship, which was like a couple weeks ago, I applied for a project management role with Microsoft. And it's different for different companies. Some companies have, the main project management role. But when I applied, actually, there was a full header that said full-time opportunities for students or recent graduates for technical consulting and client success. And when I looked into a couple of other bigger companies as well, such as Google, the project manager role also falls sometimes under like a consultant or client success. So I just want to make a little note that if you can't find like the actual application, it might be under something else. So when I applied through Microsoft to apply to the project management role, I actually had to apply to the whole full title, the full-time opportunities. So when I applied, I was actually being considered for all of these opportunities that are stated here: customer success account manager, customer engineer, consultant, project manager, support engineer, and pursuit lead. And I was just kind of went in, and I hope that through my resume and stuff, they would see that I was leaning towards project management. So underneath this big title, this was what Microsoft had for their project manager description. And it's kind of long if anybody just kind of wants to go in and read it. But basically, the overview was the most important thing. So project managers display an unusual mix of project management and consulting skills, along with a passion for technology to ensure project success with our customers. So once I talked to a couple of other project managers who work for bigger companies, they definitely stated that there's kind of not really a merge, but now there's a lot of more of an emphasis between project management and consulting, which kind of ends up getting not really that much mixed in, but they found through like a couple of McKinsey studies that a lot of project managers and consulting people in consulting roles tend to have almost the exact same personalities. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but because you're in a client-facing role and because you are technically dealing with consistent solution of problems, a lot of people that are good at being project managers are also very good at being in quite literally any other client-facing role, which leads us back to the fact that all of these were under the same kind of role, because they do kind of encompass the same type of personality and problem-solving skills. So I applied for project manager, and I was like, I really want this, and I feel like my experiences, I mean, I had been a project manager twice before, so I really thought that my experiences were really gonna lead me towards that. So I applied for this, I did my first interview. The first interview was very easy, behavioral, didn't really go into much about project management. And I just I did the final round interview, and during the final round interview, I wanna really quickly go back to these interview questions. I was asked about the most challenging projects I've managed so far and what I did with them. I talked about my pre-internship experience, my biggest mistakes in past projects. I talked about the fact that a lot of times I didn't know what I was doing, and I was too scared to ask, so I'd spend so much time just Googling stuff because I didn't want to look dumb. So those types of questions were the ones that I received for my final round interviews. They were very much behavioral. I was given a certain scenario. For example, we're working on a project where Microsoft hasn't released their this type of service yet, but your client really wants it like now at a certain point, and you sign a contract. It was a pretty much all of the questions just really wanted to know how you would deal in a client-facing interaction with a problem that was given to you. So returning, sorry, as I stated, because a lot of these personalities are very similar. And even though I was actually I was told that I was being considered for the project management role, I actually ended up landing a customer success account manager role, which if you read overview, kind of overlaps a bit. It's working with customers, it's working to find a solution. It's just in a different setting. I'm not going to be doing project documentation, but there will be different type of documentation, which I'm already prepared to do because I know the outline, I know what the life cycles are. So what I want to emphasize is that project management is definitely the door that leads to so many other paths, because as I stated previously, when I came into computer science, all everybody was talking about was, I want to code for Google, I want to code for Facebook, I want to do this. Or even when I would talk to a lot of electrical engineers during my time as a teaching assistant, they would always talk about, they feel like that there is only certain types of roles that they could be considered for because of their major. But I really want to emphasize that that's not true. There's so many other roles. Being a project manager, one of the last things I want to say is that, there's so many options for jobs that cater to your personal skills where you will thrive. And it could be very easy to, be an undergraduate and think, I am studying STEM, for example, but you think that STEM jobs are just really not for you. That's a lot of how I felt. I just felt like I didn't have the drive for that, but I still wanted to be involved in it. I still felt that there was somewhere where I could fit in and where my skills would really be the best. And so, yeah, I really want to emphasize that there are so many roles, and project management is definitely something worth looking into, because even though if you feel like project management isn't for you, through it, there's so many other roles that you probably hadn't even considered yourself for, where your skills are perfect for them. So I really want to emphasize again how much I want people to look into project management to find these positions. So yeah, if you have any questions about project management, consulting, client-facing roles, or interview, please feel free to reach out to me. I am more than happy to help. And yeah, that's my presentation about project management.
Okay, well, first, thank you, Paulina, for everything that you've just shared with us. That was very insightful and really interesting and inspiring. So Jonathan, do you have any questions?
If I'll have any, I'll email, but not right now.
Okay. All right, well, wonderful. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Dr. Morrison, for having me and for everything. I guess we can follow up with that. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on for your guest lectures, and I hope that the rest of the lecture goes well as well.
Well, I tell people, I get a lot of questions about why don't you do industry jobs, and these are the kind of experiences, getting to work with people like you and getting to see people like you grow and thrive and to figure out what it is that you want to do. This is the kind of thing that is one of the things that I really enjoy about this job. So I'm proud of you. Keep up the great work, and I look forward to seeing you do awesome things at Microsoft.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Morrison. I'll be sure to catch up soon.
Yeah, awesome.
All right. I'll see you later, Dr. Morrison. Thank you for having me.
See you.
Bye.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over two questions, and they're kind of string questions, but we're also going to be applying other concepts that we've learned so far this semester. So the first question is known as the valid parentheses problem. And in any code segment, we have to make sure that the code has the correct number of parentheses, braces, and brackets, but they also have to be in the correct order. So if we have this, that's fine. But if we have this, isn't fine, because we have to make sure that they open and close correctly. So from the LeetCode description, the first one is simple as just 2 parentheses, and it's true. The second one will output true, and we see here that we have parentheses, brackets, and braces. And then in 3 and 4, we see this one fails because we have an open parentheses and just a bracket. Here we have the counts are the same, but we don't have them match up correctly. And then here we have one that's going to be true because the brackets are in the middle and then the braces are out on the outside. So what I want to do is I want to show you a long correct answer and seeing how it is that we would want to go through this particular approach, and then see if we can apply some of our knowledge of data structures to be able to solve the problem. So the first thing, I would want to evaluate this step by step and see what it is that I have successfully done and what I don't have done. So first I would just be putting the brace, and then I put a parentheses, then a bracket, and then a parentheses, and then we get here. So the interesting thing about this is we have a match here. And what happens is when people going into interviews are trying to approach this from a brute force, the brute force approach is big O of n squared, because you'd have to go through every possible scenario to be able to try to get to it. However, we know that we have a match here. And we know that we've been keeping track of this second string. So if we are done with this, we can think of it just like if we were going through the code and executing it. Once we get past this parentheses, we're done with the code, which means that if we found its pair, well, why don't we just remove that from our current set? And so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to remove the pair, and now we have that element off. So now we're going to do the same thing with this bracket, with this brace, bracket, yeah. So what's going to happen is we're going to delete this pair here because we see that this one's here. And what's happening is since we've gotten rid of these, the next thing we're trying to do is see if these two match. And so now that we're able to keep track of this because we have our most recent value here. So if we encounter a right element, we can just delete an element and move on here. So we're going to delete the left, and now we are continuing. So now I've put on the next left, and I'm going to do the next thing for the next couple of elements. And here we have a match. We're going to have a right one here next. And we're going to see that when we do that, we can just take that left element off. And we're going to continue. We can have another left element, another left element. Now we've encountered a right element, so we can take that previous one off because it matches. And we can do the same thing here. Now we can take off bracket, a parentheses, got another parentheses, and now we have this one, and we see that this one matches over here. So that's good. We're keeping track of everything. So we can even add another pair of parentheses here, and we're going to see that it goes up, and then we delete it from the second one. And then we get to that very last bracket, and now we delete it, and we have an empty string, and it's valid. And I want to go through the same process, except I've made a mistake here deliberately, and our code is going to fail at this particular parentheses. So what's going to happen is we're going to go through that same process of insertion and deletion. And then when we get here, so now this is where we fail. And so the question is, how do we know that we failed? Well, the reason why is because the most recent one that we'd want to close off is this parentheses, but this bracket is the one that would pair with. So therefore, we automatically know that this failed. So we don't need to evaluate the rest of the string. We can just say we're done, and we are going to close this out. So the approach that I use here is we're just going to use a stack. So we can push and pop, and that substring that I had in the bottom can be represented as the most recent left pair that we need to put up with a right pair. And so what we're going to do is we're going to push the left characters, the left brace, bracket, and parentheses, onto the stack. And if we encounter a right character, what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, if it matches, if it has its pair, we're just going to pop it off the top of the stack and continue. If it doesn't match, we are automatically going to say that the code is bad and it fails, and we know precisely where it fails. Likewise, if the stack is not empty at the end, then we're going to have non-closed braces. So for example, if I have this, and I'm going through here and I have left, left, right, and so this is going to go away. And then I would do left again, and now we're here, so I'm going to have this one go away. Notice how I have one remaining. So therefore, I don't have a closer, and everything else here can be as a pair, so it's gone. But because we're not empty, we don't have a final close, so therefore it's not valid either. So we can take advantage of that top, pop, and size methods that we've written earlier. And we're able to know the size because we can keep track with that iterator. But we also know that stacks are based off of singly linked lists. So what happens is what we're actually doing is we are deleting from the front and we're pushing onto the front. So when we insert an element, if I have a brace, a brace, a parentheses, what's actually going on is I have the head pointer, and initially I have a brace. And then I would push front, so I'm going to move that head pointer to the new node that I've created. I'm going to go here, and then we have pointing to next. When I get here, what's going to happen is I'm going to pop from front, so I'm going to delete that and update the head pointer. And then when I encounter this one here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to end up freeing it, and if once it's an empty singly linked list, that means that we have found the valid code. The next thing I'd like to do is take you through my code and show you how I develop my solution. So first I have this code balanced.h, and it's a library that I've developed. And I have two functions here that I've written, but most of the support is in the libraries for the C++ standard template library. So I have IOStream and FStream to read in from a file. I have a vector, a string, and a stack. And what I have done is I've allowed my code that I'm reading in to be able to have multiple lines. So for example, if I go up here, one of the pieces of code I'm going to be able to evaluate is good code 3.text, and this is a C version of hello world, and that's correct. Likewise, with bad code 3.text, I have a hello world, but in this case, I have a bad parentheses. I have a bad brace here. And so I want to be able to find valid code all the way through. So what I'm doing is I'm using the getLine function from the IF stream to read in each string. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate through every character. If I encounter the character that's not a brace or a parentheses or a bracket, I'm going to ignore it for this problem. And to give you some perspective, good code 4.text is that example that I gave in the slide. So here I would want to be able to ignore spaces and not worry about it. And by using a vector, I can read in an entire file and be able to evaluate this. My second code is called check code, and I'm passing a vector of strings with the call by reference. And this is going to be where I actually run the algorithm, where I'm going to implement a stack inside of check code to test the result. And also I have pound define for all of these variables here, for all those, all right, so we can see why I have vector and string, for example. The next thing I'd like to show you, and I apologize, let me scroll up, is the actual .cpp function definitions themselves. In the first function, I have get code, and I'm reading in from a C++ IF stream, and I'm putting everything into a vector. So I create a temporary string, and then I use the standard get line. So I read in from the IF stream with code file, and I read the temp string all the way through the new line. And then once I've done that, I push back onto the code vector. And then this is going to be where I'm done. So I'm going to close the file here. What I will do next in check code is I'm going to pass that vector of strings, and this contains the entire file code. I've created a stack of characters, and then the first thing I do is I iterate through the code vector, which is each line of the code. And then here I'm going to iterate through each character in that string. So that's why we have code vector .@i.size. Code, if you also remember when I talked about the C++ standard template library, that the .@i provides us additional level of bounds checking that just doing the braces, array access operator has in that class. And that's why I'm accessing the piece of the specific character this way with .@i.@j. We also note that we learned that switch statements require exact inputs. So things that are deterministic, like ints, long unsigned ints, characters, and we can't use things like floats and doubles. Since it's a character and it's represented with an 8-bit ASCII value, we can use that as an input to a switch statement. And we can use that as kind of a hash function to get to the specific case that we want to implement. So the first set of cases I have here, and let me zoom in a little bit so it's a little more visible, are what I call the left cases, the left brace, the left bracket, the left parentheses. So I come across, I say, well, if this particular character in this particular line in the code is a left, then I push it there. If it's a parentheses left, or if it's a brace left, I just push them onto the stack. Then I also have a case right, and in each one of these right cases, I have two things I need to do. If it's a valid match, so I have the right one, and so it matches with its left, then all I'm going to do is remove from the top of the stack. Otherwise, then it's going to say, I actually don't want this, I left that in there with troubleshooting an error. I'm going to return false if it doesn't match or it doesn't have any elements in there. I do the same thing with the right parentheses, and I'm going to do the same thing with the right bracket. The last thing I have is the default case of the switch statement, which does nothing, so I can skip over everything else for now. The last thing I'm going to do in this problem is I'm going to return if the temporary stack size is equal to 0. And that accounts for that last case I was drawing on the screen where I would have, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I have a match here and a match there, but I still have one remaining. This will return false if the stack size has one or more elements remaining, but passed all the other tests. So in the valid parent, I've imported the balance.h file. I'm reading in from a file, so I'm going to put in from the command line, and I have argc not equal to 2, just to check for everything. And then I'm going to create the IF stream and open that file. I'm going to check to make sure that the file exists. And in this IF stream, it's done with just .good. And then finally, what I do is I will create a vector of strings. I will call getCode to get that vector of strings and then pass code file, which is my IF stream. And then I'm actually going to check the code itself, and I'm going to use that to dictate an if statement, where if it's true, it'll state that the code in that file is true. Otherwise, it will state that that code in that file is false. So from here, what I'd like to do is I'd like to make clean. Oh, sorry. Optional 09, clear, make clean, make valid paren. And so in this, I have bad code 1 through 4, and I have good code 1 through 4. And in our make file that we've been using in our class, it puts all the executables in the exe folder. So we do .valid paren. And then I will say good code 1.text, and it validates that it's good, that's valid code. I'm going to do the same thing for valid2. Good code 3.text is going through a hello world. Good 4 text that's valid. And now I'm going to do bad code 1 through 4, just to show that it's going to return invalid code for each one of these approaches. So now we've seen that all of the tests that we've developed in our test suite have passed for this particular problem. All right, so do you have any questions before I go on to the second problem?
No.
All right, in that case, I'll just move right along. Okay, so here's all the code, and that's all posted on the course website if you want to review it later. All right, so the second question is, given a string S, find the length of the longest substring without repeating characters. So here I have an example where we have ABC, ABC, BB, and the length is 3, and the reason why is because ABC doesn't have any repeating elements. The second example, we have 5 Bs, and it should return an output of 1. Here we have 3 PWW, and then WKE is the subset. And the important thing that they note is that it has to be a substring, not a subsequence. So this would just be, if it was a subsequence, it would just be the order of the unique values. But in this case, it wants to find the longest substring. So we have to find the actual length of this particular substring. So in order to kind of make clear how you should approach this problem, the first thing I want to do is I want to go through what would be considered a brute force approach. In the brute force approach, we'd start at A, and then we have a repeating value of AB, ABC, and it stops here. So the longest possible substring from this way on is 3. We encounter the same thing. The longest possible we could get to would be 3 as well. If we get to C, we have CAB, and it stops because we get to C. So we have some sort of correct number of values that we can learn from the brute force approach, where this tells me if I start here and I go this way, this is the largest number of elements. However, this becomes a big O of n squared approach because we have to start everywhere and go all over again. But what we see here is that we can use this to know the possible length from each location. So if we see that there's a way in which we have some sort of knowledge of that length, and we could potentially work backwards, this is an opportunity for dynamic programming. And we can take advantage of our dynamic programming to be able to significantly reduce the amount of time. So in this case, in the brute force was n squared, and in the solution we're going to review here, it's going to be big O of n. So here I have a set of 15 characters. And in this particular case, this is a, I actually randomly generated this set of characters. And if we're trying to come up with a brute force solution, what we're going to see is that the largest possible number of values is different everywhere throughout the entire string. So let me actually just slow down just a little bit so you can see what's going on. So at 8, we see that the longest we can go is up to S, but we can't go any further because I is a duplicate here. And we're going to have the same kind of thing happen here. We move to N, and it's going to be 7. And we're going to see that we get here, we can go through 5, but something interesting is going to happen. We're actually going to start going on further. And what we're going to see with B is it's going to go all the way here because we're going to have another repeat of I there. So this value is going to come out as 7 when I go to that part of the animation. And then until we hit the repeating one, then we have it we have to start there. With L, we no longer have to worry about this I, we can just go this way. And we can go all the way until we hit this O. So what we're going to see is this one's going to have 5, 4, 3, 2, and then it's going to be 2 and then 1 at the end. 5, 4, 3, 2. And then when we hit EO, EO is going to be the longest length, and then O is going to be 1 by itself. So when we have this kind of thing, what we're going to see is that if we start at the end and go backwards, we could use our knowledge of hash tables and use dynamic programming to be able to solve the problem. So let me move this over so it's clear. What I'm going to do in my solution is I'm going to keep track of the current value as well as the maximum length. And we're going to start at the last character and move backwards. And so I have a hash table, and the key is going to be the character, and the value is going to be the most recently, the access of the location in that string. So I start out at O, and here we have 0 through 14. So the current location is going to be O. So we see the key is O, and the value is 14. I've said cur is equal to 1 and max is equal to 1. And then we move down, and then I'm going to hash E with a value of 13. And then I increment cur, and we set max equal to that cur. So now we get to our first duplicate. So what I have done is that before we had 14 here in the hash, and we have these characters up until the most recent duplicate, and that's going to be our largest size. And so now I've updated the hash, and now we move to I. I is now hashed at 11, and now we're up incrementing 3. We're going to go to M. M's going to hash at 10, and we're going to keep going. And now let's see what happens when we get to I here. So by following that same process, we're going to see that this is at 8, and going to this value, this gives us the most recent duplicate. So this is going to be 11, and we're going to set 11 minus 8, and that'll give us 3. And so this is going to be the current value. So what's going to happen is we're going to set current equal to 3, and we're going to leave max as 5 because 3 is less than 5. So from here we had 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the current value is going to be 3. And then the max would be 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 5. So now we go back to 3. When you go to 6, we're going to see that it's 4 and 5. And S is hashed at 7. P, we're now going to increment 5 here. And now it's equal to the max. And we see that P is currently at 6. Now we're going to move to F, and F is unique. And we see that F is hashed in the table. The current value is 6, and the max value is 6. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to hash B, and we're going to see that B is not in the table. And now the current and max are both 7. But now we see that I is in the table again, and this is going to be at 3. The previous value of hash is previously here at 8. So we're going to see that it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So it's going to be 8 minus 3. Cur is going to become 5, and the max is going to remain at 7. And that's exactly what happens. When we move to W, what we're going to see is that W is going to be hashed at 2, and we're going to increment cur. And so now cur is 6, and the max is 7. We're next going to hash N. N is at 1, so our current value is 7, and now we've tied our max. And then Now we're going to hash C. C is unique. And C is going to be, now we're going to increment her to 8. And 8 happens to be greater than our current max, so it's 7. So with this dynamic programming, what we have discovered is that we now know at any given location what the largest possible size would be. So for 6, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And this works because at the next element, I is there. Same thing if I do 3, I'd say 1, 2, 3, and this doesn't work because O is there. If I just pick W, W is 6. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We see that I can't do this because we have a duplicate. And so what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to return the unsigned max value, and that will give us the result that's asked for in LeetCode. So let me show you the code really quick. I call this sub no repeat. Now, in the algorithmic side, what I'm doing is I'm calling get longest non-repeat, and I'm passing by const I'm calling by reference a const standard string. And the reason I've done const here is because I'm creating strings here. These should not be able to be changed because these are just temporary values. They don't have any variables that are stored, which means it won't compile if I remove the const. So first, let me remove the const here. And you're going to see that when I run make sub no repeat, that the compiler error that comes up of all of this, you go to the very first thing, you'll see invalid initialization of non-const reference to standard string from an R value of const char star. So this is something that C++ is inheriting from C. So this is defining this as a const character pointer to a character array. So to get around this, the best thing we can do is call it as const. And the reason why it threw so many errors is because every single time I was creating a string to throw into it, it was printing out different values. I mean, it was creating a compiler error. Same thing here, if I get rid of this const, it's now only going to do it once, but it's still going to throw the compiler error. And the reason why is because in this particular function run algorithm, I call longest non-repeat test where I have a const standard string called by reference. And then here, because it's not const, it's going to cause problems if I try to change it. So C++ is going to require me to make that const. And the first thing I can do is I'm going to compile there. And so let me show you the algorithm. In the algorithm, I set my current and maximum equal to 0, and I create a hash table using standard unordered map with character and int. And so with int, I say int iter is equal to int test string dot size -1. And just to point out something, the reason why I'm taking the long unsigned int that's returned from the vector.size method and casting it to an int is because I'm iterating from the end of the string forwards. And what I'm doing here is if I were to leave this as a long unsigned int, what would happen is I would do minus minus, and my check is to make sure it's greater than or equal to 0. So what ends up happening if I have 3, 2, 1, 0, and then I do 0 minus 1, for a long unsigned int, that's going to be interpreted as all ones, 64 ones, which means it's going to be still greater than 0 because it's going to be the largest possible unsigned integer that can be represented with a 64-bit value. And it's just going to keep going forever. It's actually going to eventually hang up and not run. So that's why I have an int there. The next thing I do is I say if my character hash, I use, since it's C++11 standard, I have to use the .count method where I'm passing the particular character. And if it's not in there, Then I'm going to insert into the hash, and I'm inserting the character as the key and the iterator as the value. And then I increment current. Otherwise, what's going to happen is this means that the element is in the hash. So here what I'm doing is I'm calling the hash, I'm getting the location, and that would be, for example, that first one was 11 minus 8. So iter here would be 8, and it would be 11 minus 8, and it would put 3 in there. And then I would set char hash of that particular character to the iterator. So this is where I'd be updating I from 11 to 8. And then the last step is if current is greater than maximum, then we just set maximum equal to the current value, and then I return the max value. In main, I have the example from the slides and then all of the inputs that were requested by LeetCode. So I've compiled it. So let me run the executable. Sub no repeat, and we are going to see that we correctly get 8, which is what we calculated when we went through, 3, 1, and then 3. All right, so do you have any questions?
No, that sounds good.
All right, well, on that note, it's 7 o'clock and I've done both of the problems. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and that Paulina's insight, particularly how her pre-ternship kind of helped her get a foot in the door with Microsoft. I hope that's something that inspires you when you as you're going to continue data structures and as you move on to being a TA next semester.
Yeah, thank you for putting this together.
Oh, not a problem. Happy to help. You have a wonderful evening.
You too.